Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Lube Tube. My name is Jeanette, and this is my co-host, Brittany.
Hey.
We're on episode 6 now, and this episode is titled Boobs, Blues, and Baby Poos, Surviving the Fourth Trimester. So all about that postpartum period. We had quite a few ladies actually reach out to us and ask us if we could do an episode on this, because I know I personally have been there and it is just not what you expect. And so I thought we could touch on some things today, kind of get some clarity for a lot of our ladies and hopefully be able to help you and kind of give you some things to basically use to help you through this postpartum period that is so difficult for a lot. Why this is important is because I feel, especially with your first baby, you go your whole life just basically taking care of yourself. And then you get married to your significant other, or you start dating your significant other and you end up taking care of yourself and them. But then you add a baby to the mix, and adding that baby to the mix changes the whole dynamic. Now you're more focused on taking care of that baby than yourself. And I think a lot of times us as women get stuck in only focusing on that baby instead of actually focusing on ourselves. And my whole goal for this is to basically reiterate the importance of taking care of yourself during that postpartum period as well. Obviously, keeping a baby alive is number one, but we also have to remind ourselves how important it is to, if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not going to be able to take care of that baby as well as we could.
Right. And I think the build up to, your first pregnancy, when you are going through all the emotions of, I'm pregnant, I'm trying to prepare, I'm maybe a little scared about the whole birthing process, but
yes,
do we ever really focus on postpartum?
No. And you're exactly right. Every lady I see in that prenatal period, when they're coming in for those visits, everybody wants to talk about the delivery itself. And don't get me wrong, that's an extremely important part of this. But what is that postpartum period going to look like? And I wish, and I personally should do this too, talk about that period with my ladies a lot more, because we do talk about the birthing process. We do talk about the whole prenatal period and what that next visit's going to look like, and, kind of helping them through that point. But what happens when you have that baby and then the hospital says, all right, go home, good luck, and you walk out with a baby carrier, right? Holy smokes, that's scary.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important that not only do we talk about what that looks like, but also talk about the mood changes that can happen, right? Our hormones are going crazy and our body is not the same. And a lot of times women can go through postpartum depression, right? So we're going to touch on that too. So there was a statistic that showed that 1 in 7 women, which is crazy, but 1 in 7 women will go through some sort of postpartum depression. That's about 15% of the national population. And that's from the National Institute of Health. And I think it's also important that if you think about 1 in 7 or 1 in 7 people, okay, so if you were to take 7 of your friends that have had babies, there's probably more than one of those ladies that dealt with this. And honestly, it probably was not talked about, right? I don't know about you, but I very rarely have my friends talk about how hard and sad this can be.
Yeah, well, because you're supposed to be really happy. You just had a baby, right?
Uh-huh.
Yay.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how do you define postpartum?
Sure. So the definition of postpartum is obviously after having the baby. And that's typically within the first 6 weeks of life of the baby, or 6 weeks after delivery. But honestly, postpartum period can last all the way up to a year after delivery. And the physical, the emotional, and the hormonal roller coaster that kind of happens during this period is something that we're going to hopefully touch on this during this episode, and just what all of that looks like and kind of what that right. means for each
and
patient.
How different it can be for everybody.
Right. Absolutely. There's this common misconception, I think, that everybody's just supposed to bounce back after delivering a baby. I didn't bounce back. Mm-hmm. To be perfectly honest, had some of the worst postpartum depression with my first baby. And I didn't even know what it was. I just actually didn't talk about it. Obviously, I talked about it with my husband. And we were both kind of lost, because I went from being this super happy-go-lucky person, so excited to have our first baby, so excited to introduce him to family and friends and do all these wonderful things with our baby. And I found myself so overwhelmed. I didn't want to do any of it. I wanted to stay home and just be there with the baby and wanting my husband there at all times too, right? And that was extremely difficult when he had to go back to work, right? Because then it was just me. And I had 12 weeks with this infant that I knew nothing about, right? And how to take care of that baby. So bouncing back, I think is obviously a common misconception. Are there ladies that bounce back? Yeah. Like I have this mom that recently gave birth to twins, right? And she was like meant to do this. I think there's just some ladies that are just like meant to do this. And I am in complete awe every time I see her. So she came in for a postpartum visit recently, and both babies were on the same sleep schedule. She looked like $1,000,000. Her hair was all done. Her makeup was perfect. She's like, I just love this. And I mean, and she wasn't lying. She really has it all together. And I think that is a very few and far between.
There's this girl on social media,
Mm-hmm.
and I hear this is coming from a girl who doesn't do social media, but
Antisocial.
yes, antisocial. Brittany has heard about this lady, Ballerina Farms.
No,
Are you familiar with her?
I don't listen and watch all that stuff.
No, she has had multiple children.
Okay.
And looks fabulous, and just recently had one, and then I don't remember the time frame, but went and was involved in a pageant, and I think she won.
Stop it!
I think she
See,
won.
That's what I'm talking about.
But let me tell you, I had a friend deliver some flowers to me for my birthday from her. She has like a whole business. Yes,
these flowers. Yes.
And they were stunning.
So what is the company?
Ballerina Farms.
Oh, that's what it's called.
Yes,
Ballerina
she used to be a ballerina. She was actually, this is a way too big of a sidebar, but I think she was the first person, I want to say at Juilliard, and I might be wrong.
Oh, wow.
Who was pregnant while at Juilliard or something like that. Something wild. So this lady has had multiple children and is still looking fabulous, and certainly is this bounce back type person.
Right. And there are those. And honestly, you can't compare yourself to these people, right? Because the most do not bounce back, right? So yeah, and I think that it's important that you don't compare yourself to
Ballerina Farms,
the ballerina, right? Do not compare yourself to a ballerina. I mean, that should just be like.
Again, forgive me if I got that story wrong. My brother's fiance is going to be like, Brittany, I can't believe you brought that up with not all the knowledge. Sorry, Keeks.
She's going to be so mad at you.
I'm so sorry. Okay, so let's talk about the physical of the postpartum.
Okay. So, there's obviously two ways to have a baby. There's vaginal deliveries and then there's C-sections. The vaginal delivery is the most natural approach, obviously, but there are times where mamas need to have C-sections. And the amount of guilt that is surrounded by a C-section is also really frustrating, right? Because it's not like we go in and choose to have a C-section. Are there women to do that? Yes. There's a lot of women that don't want to have a vaginal delivery and their doctors will work with them and they end up having a C-section because of that. Maybe that's what their want is. But for most reasons, a C-section is done because something is wrong with the mom or the baby or the labor is not progressing, right? There are multiple factors, right, that would cause a C-section, but the amount of guilt that is surrounded by that. So I see a lot of ladies that come in postpartum that maybe had a C-section and they're like, oh, I ended up having a C-section and they're down on themselves. And I don't think that that should be something to be down on yourself about, right? You still have a healthy baby and you're still a mom and you still walk away with this beautiful child, no matter how this baby comes out, right? The difference in healing is quite different, right? So vaginal deliveries, these ladies tend to not be in as much pain, right? Because obviously they didn't have a surgical procedure. These C-section ladies are going to take a little bit longer to heal. They actually obviously have to heal the incision. They have to try to get that musculature back that has been obviously dissected. That's a gross word, but cut through in order to have a baby. So there's a lot more healing involved. But as far as the emotional toll that I think C-sections place on the mother, I just wish there wasn't that stigma. I personally had 2 C-sections. My first C-section actually ended up being an emergency C-section. And obviously I had no control over that. Austin, my oldest, was in distress. And so they had to obviously do an emergency C-section during labor, because if we didn't, I didn't know if I was going to get as healthy of a boy at the end, right? So it was important that that doctor made that decision. And I think it's important that women realize that these C-sections are not done easily for the physician. They're not just like made a decision that's, oh, we're just going to do that. It's well thought out. And these people are professionals and they make this decision because of the health of you and your baby. Right.
But you still look snatched, you know?
Oh, snatched? I don't know. I feel like the older I get, I'm like, oh, why do I have that C-section scar that's like hanging over now?
No.
I know what y'all are talking. You know what I'm talking about. If you've had a C-section, what is that little like? Can I say that word? Fupa.
Oh my God. Wait, this is taking me to something that I'm supposed to talk about, and I can't remember. There's another word
Than fupa.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh God.
Oh, well, you'll think of it.
Yeah, let me
You'll
me
think
some
of it.
time. It'll come
But
to me.
I feel like the older I've gotten, and I feel like my weight hasn't really changed much in the last several years, but that area, it's so hard to keep that part in control. And if you know what I'm talking about, I'm going to need you to message me so I feel a little bit better about myself. Okay. Oh man. But let's talk about like managing that pain, right? Most women that are vaginal deliveries can usually, unless there's a tear, right? Can usually handle the pain just with ibuprofen, right? Tylenol, kind of alternating those two. But a C-section is going to require a little bit more pain meds, right? So we're talking narcotics, right? We're talking about hydrocodone. We're talking about Norco. We're talking about things that can control the pain a little bit better. Are there ladies that can do it without Norco and pain meds? Well, 100%, right? There are absolutely ways to get around that pain med. But if you have to take it, I don't think that that's a bad thing, right?
Yeah, but so if you do have a vaginal birth and you do have those tears,
yes, yeah.
What can you expect with that?
Those tears are, first degree, second degree, third degree, and that just basically means how big and how deep that tear goes. There's a lot of things we can do. There's like numbing creams that we can apply, numbing sprays that we can apply. Sometimes, like we talked about last time, a vaginal estrogen can be very helpful to apply, like a vaginal estrogen cream if it's really uncomfortable and it's just not healing as well as it should. But I want to warn you, ladies, do not look down there. Don't do it. You're going to want to look. Don't look, okay? Because you're going to think your vagina is never going to look the same again. And I'll be honest with you, a postpartum vagina that had some tears, right? Woof, that's not pretty, but it will heal. The vagina is a wonderful thing, and it will heal. It will start to come back together, and it will all look normal again, right? So don't look. Whatever you do, do not look.
So, but for those people that have tears, I think sometimes, and even those that didn't have tears, there is the concern of, okay, when I'm cleared, is this going to be painful sex? Or, I haven't had my first poop.
The first poop. That's a scary one. Yeah. So 100%, especially if you're taking the narcotics because of a C-section, I absolutely recommend stool softeners, right? And honestly, there was a study that showed that docusate sodium, which is Colace, right? Over-the-counter Colace, which is a stool softener. There's a study that shows that actually doesn't help women as much as it does men. So I prefer to recommend like Miralax, right? Or probiotics, or increasing the fiber with like a Benefiber or Metamucil. That tend to actually help the constipation issue and making that first poop a little bit smoother. Smoother.
Well, I mean, that's the correct word. Smooth move too, right?
Smooth move.
That's a T.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
I've used it.
Oh, okay. Now, also, let's talk about breastfeeding and what that can look like.
Yeah. So first of all, not everybody breastfeeds, and it's okay if you don't, so don't put that pressure on yourself. If you are not great at it and it makes life a little worse for you, or it causes too much stress and anxiety, the best baby is a fed baby, right? So let's not give ourselves this guilt trip that if I do not feed my baby through breast milk, that this baby is not going to be okay. There are some ladies that just can't do it, and that is okay. There's some people that their breast milk never comes in. There's some ladies that maybe the latch isn't great. I do recommend a lactation consultant if that's the issue.
Were you breastfed?
I was not breastfed.
Me either.
Yeah. Well, most of us at our age were not, because it wasn't a big thing back then.
I think actually my My mom, I know that, so I'm the oldest, and then I have a brother that's 3 years younger, and then I have a brother that's 8 years younger.
Mhm.
I was the mistake, by the way.
Oh, no, you were
No.
never a mistake.
No, well, yeah. But the third one, I remember, I was old enough to remember that my mom really was trying to breastfeed, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know obviously sometimes there's issues with the nipples that
Right.
just aren't conducive to
Absolutely.
breastfeeding. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you could obviously pump, right? You could use a pump to try to get that milk out. That is time consuming, right? For a lot of ladies, that's washing all of the supplies to pump, that's cleaning bottles and doing all the things. And it's okay. Like it is okay, right? And then there's the moms that are amazing at breastfeeding and they love that connection. And it is truly a gift. And they absolutely are just so happy doing it. And great for them, right? Great for them. And I want the best for you and your baby, whatever that means. If that means breastfeeding, if that means a combination of breast and bottle, if that means formula only, whatever that means for you, you need to do what's best for you and your baby, not what everybody tells you to do.
Right. And then for those that are breastfeeding, there's obviously the mastitis that can happen.
Mastitis, yeah. The engorgement, right? That initial, for the first 24 hours, you're going to notice you're like, nothing's coming out. And you are getting colostrum, right? Which is a very important part for the baby. It's going to have all those antibodies and all of that really good nutrient for the baby. But as far as milk coming out, it doesn't usually happen in that first 24 hours. And then the engorgement hits and you're like, holy smokes, your boobs hurt. They're big. They're sometimes red and hot and veiny. And so it's all very new, especially if you've never done that. And that can be uncomfortable. That can be extremely uncomfortable. So I recommend a good supportive bra. I recommend getting the breast pads that help kind of pick up that extra leaking that can occur. And then obviously just if you want to soothe it, obviously ibuprofen, Tylenol can help soothe that pain, and which are both safe to take while breastfeeding.
Now, another thing I think that we've had questions about is the amount of bleeding that can happen.
It's different per patient. Yeah. You know, most women will bleed after having a baby. You'll actually bleed more usually after a vaginal delivery than a C-section. Just because with a C-section, there's a lot of procedural stuff that gets done where they're kind of cleaning everything out in the uterus. But vaginal delivery, you're going to bleed, and you can bleed for a very long time, right? So that's all very normal. It should never be a large amount of blood. It should never be a whole lot of blood where you're like getting dizzy, kind of feeling lightheaded, maybe even having to change a pad like every 30 minutes, that's not normal, right? But it's very normal to bleed after having a baby. And a lot of women don't know, hey, is this my period or is this vaginal bleeding because of a baby? Like, what is this, right? But a lot of times what will happen is you'll bleed, you'll stop bleeding. And then depending on if you're breastfeeding or not, when your period will come back again, right? A lot of times breastfeeding women don't get a period right away. There are some that do, but don't always get a period right away while you're breastfeeding. And that's just because of the hormone progesterone, right? The other women that start to feed with a bottle and do more formula, they can tend to start their period a lot faster. And I must say, just because you're breastfeeding and not getting a period does not mean that you can't get pregnant, right? So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of women think, oh, I'm breastfeeding. I can't get pregnant. That's not true, right? So absolutely, if you are in that postpartum period, past the 6 weeks, please wait till 6 weeks before you have sex because A, we want you to heal. B, that's going to hurt. So give yourself some time to heal before having sex.
Can we also just talk real quick?
Sure.
About these ginormous pads?
Oh God.
Can they change that? What can they do?
They're so big.
They're so big and just not fair.
I know.
Can't make it cuter?
Maybe we should come up with something like cute postpartum panties.
Honestly.
I think we're onto something.
Wait, don't talk about this anymore.
Okay.
We don't want anybody to take our idea.
Our next idea.
Yes, exactly. Okay, let's move on to the mental health aspect and maybe explain the difference between what baby blues is and then what true postpartum.
Yeah. So baby blues is where you're sad, right? But you still are enjoying the postpartum period. You still have that joy when you're around your baby. You're going to have most women are going to have a little bit of blues just because that hormonal fluctuation. And what that means is you're going to have some sadness, you're going to have some tears, you're going to feel some overwhelming feeling of anxiety. But the difference between that and postpartum depression is postpartum depression, you are extremely sad, right? You're crying all the time, or you have a lack of physical connection to that baby, right? When there's a lack of connection or a lack of connection emotionally with your spouse or the baby, and you are sad more than happy, that's when you need to seek medical attention, right? And a lot of times we think, well, this is normal. This is how I'm supposed to feel. And I don't want to talk about it because it's embarrassing. And I'm supposed to be at home and loving on my baby. And this is supposed to be the most magical, wonderful time of my life. Well, yes, but at the same time, this is a really hard time of your life. Taking care of this infant that completely depends on you for every little thing can be extremely overwhelming. And so I think it's important that we also talk about how happy and joyful it is, but at the same time, it's hard. This is not easy. And I think it's imperative that if you are feeling those feelings of sadness, right, all the time, or maybe that lack of connection or that feeling of overwhelming anxiety, that you do seek medical advice because there's different things that we can do to help you through that.
Right. And so it's depression, but it's also anxiety. It could be PTSD from a traumatic birth. And there's also the OCD aspect.
Oh, I had that.
Actually way more prevalent than
I had that.
You did? What was your OCD? What was it?
I was always worried that Austin was like not laying right. So I would check on him. Oh my God. Like I literally checked on him probably every 10 minutes. And to the point of exhaustion, right? That did he roll over? He couldn't even roll over yet, but I was worried that he was going to roll over. I was worried that carrying him, was I going to drop him? Was I going to put him in a situation where he was going to be unsafe, right? I was constantly worried that if it wasn't me taking care of him, he wasn't going to get taken care of, which can create a huge issue between you and your partner, right? Like, because then that partner feels, well, why don't you think I can take care of him? I can take care of this baby just as well as you can. And that creates a tension, right? Which there shouldn't be, but there is. And you're not meaning to do it, but in your mind, the only thing you can think of is that you are going to be a better suited to take care of that baby.
How long did that last?
Ooh, I didn't get help. I actually went to my doctor and I talked to her about it. And she said, just get some sleep.
Yikes.
Yeah, that was not a good situation because they all tell you to sleep when the baby sleeps. Well, what about the dishes that are piling up? And what about the 5 loads of laundry that haven't been done? And what about the shower I haven't taken in 3 days? And what about just my mental health? Like, yeah, I could sleep, but I could also get all of those things done, right? And so you start having that guilt of what you should do. You know, should you sleep or should you get all that other stuff done that just keeps piling up?
Right. So there, obviously, you said we can go to our provider and tell them what's going on, but there's definitely support groups. Sometimes I feel like people can go to appointments and just not feel heard, where if they are talking to their family, when they're talking to their girlfriends, then they feel like, oh, okay, I'm not alone and I'm being heard. And sometimes I think that can do better than a pill or, and I'm not saying there certainly is space for that. Absolutely.
Sure.
But I think other things are just as important. And as always, therapy is.
Right. Well, solidarity, right? That, that you're not the only one going through something as difficult as this. And this is a normal thing, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to get through this. But to be perfectly honest with you, I wish I had been offered a SSRI, right? I think looking back now, I probably would have done really well if they would have just given me a touch of Lexapro or Zoloft in order to try to get that anxiety down. Because I do feel like I didn't enjoy Austin's first 3-4 months of life because I was so anxious. Right. And I think if I would have possibly had that SSRI on board or that medication on board, I think I probably would have been able to breathe through it a little bit easier because, that was just an extremely hard time that I couldn't see the light.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I think recognizing that there may be something psychologically going on is still difficult. And back in the day, it was absolutely not even a thing.
No.
My grandma, this is a quick, interesting story. For the longest time, I knew she was raised by her grandparents and she never wanted to talk about her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Nana.
Yeah.
And I found out actually after she passed away that the reason she didn't like her mom was because her mom tried to drown her as a child. So I shouldn't say a child, as an infant.
Mm-hmm.
And so her mom, when they found her at their little pond with her new baby, they immediately sent her to a psych hospital and she never got out. She was in there for the rest of her life.
Wow.
And do I think that this was really like a true psychosis?
Yeah, postpartum psychosis.
100%. And it's just, it breaks my heart that these...
Because she could have had help, right? And it just wasn't talked about. Yeah. And that was unheard of. Mm-hmm. And that can't happen. And she must be crazy. No. These hormones are wreaking havoc. The anxiety that builds because you're taking care of this infant, I think it's just stuff that people don't talk about. And I love that we're doing this podcast because, the listeners that are listening to us are maybe going to take this and share it with friends and share it with family. And maybe they know a lady that's getting ready to have a baby and they can have that hard conversation with them and say, hey, listen to this, right? I think it might help.
Yeah, definitely.
Because poor thing.
I know.
That's awful.
But I mean, Nana had a wonderful life. So
she
did.
I know.
Yeah.
No, and I know. And I think it's great for your Nana. But what about all those people that...
Oh my God, I know. My point is that I think it's gotten better, but I think it needs to get even more better.
Yeah, for sure.
Was that good English?
God, more better.
More better. Bestest of them all. Okay, so we talked about the physical, the mental. Then we also have the change in hormones.
Mm-hmm. This is hard.
Yeah.
So you're going to feel like you're going through perimenopause. I'm just going to be perfectly honest with you. The hormones are going to fluctuate. Your estrogen's going down and up and your progesterone's huge and going up. And, you got your thyroid too that possibly could be working different because the thyroid does change during pregnancy. And it's something that we do check. And so, when all of these hormones are fluctuating postpartum, we tend to have all the symptoms. You can have hot flashes, right? That's normal.
Like bad hot flashes
yes,
too. Right?
Yeah. Hot flashes. You can feel insomnia, not just from the anxiety, but insomnia just because your hormones aren't allowing you to sleep in that deep sleep that you were before.
Hair loss.
That postpartum hair loss is rough. And that usually happens around week 8 to 12. These ladies come to me and they're brushing their hair and gobs of hair are falling out. Yeah.
It's very significant.
And I do recommend the Nutrafol. Nutrafol actually has a postpartum supplement that you can take. It's a lot of pills to take during the day, but it does work. It's basically a really good vitamin that can kind of help with that hair follicle. Again, that does actually, I do see improvement with that with my ladies. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I do recommend. Also, the fatigue, right? The fatigue is one of those fatigues that it's hard to explain because not only are you tired because you're not sleeping as much, and not only are you tired because you're anxious and you're worried about this little one, but you're also tired because of these hormones that are fluctuating, right? And you're not used to all of that fluctuation that could be happening in these weeks. So this kind of fatigue is different. There's the fatigue where you're depressed, right? Where you just don't want to get out of bed. But then there's the fatigue of motherhood, which, to be perfectly honest with you, 14 years later, I don't know if that ever goes away, right? I live tired. I'm pretty sure the moms that are listening to this can attest to that. I've been tired since 2010.
You look so great, though. I always like to say that. By the way, Jeanette's birthday, 2 days.
Oh God.
2 days.
The big 41. Wow. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm, that is.
So I always say, I've been tired since 2010 and I could just really use a nap. But then you get the anxiety about taking a nap because you feel like you missed out on something or you put something else on the back burner so you could take a nap. Oh my God, there's so much mom guilt. But anyways, we'll come off of that subject.
So with that fit, there's changes in menstruation. I know we kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
And it'll be different from patient to patient.
Right. Especially if you're breastfeeding, like I mentioned earlier, you might not get a period the whole time you're breastfeeding. And then there's others that have a period every month. Sorry, girls. But that can happen.
Yeah.
And then, as far as if we wanted to talk about birth control during the postpartum period, right? So remember we talked about you're usually cleared to have sex week 6, and you do want to protect yourself from getting pregnant during that time. whatever that means. If that's the condoms, if that's actually birth control that's prescribed, there's different options. And if you're breastfeeding, you want to stick with something that's progesterone only if we do a hormone-based birth control. So that's going to be like your Mirena IUDs, Kylena, Skyla, here we go again. And then there's the Paragard IUD that's non-hormone. You could do a progesterone-only pill, which does not contain estrogen, which will not affect your breastfeeding. And then there's the Nexplanon as well. But, these are usually talked about at that postpartum visit, that 6-week visit. And that's something you need to go in educated on, right? You need to know kind of what you're thinking for you and your partner. Are you thinking that you want to do a birth control? And if you are, which one do you feel comfortable with? If you're not breastfeeding at 6 weeks, you could do any type of birth control. So you could do anything that contains hormone, non-hormone, estrogen, progesterone, whatever you want to do, whatever works best with your risk factors, and make sure you don't have any contraindications, which is a discussion you'll have with your partner.
Okay. So earlier we talked about how you can at times lose sight when you're a new mom because you have the new baby, but you're also trying to keep up with the laundry. You're trying to make sure that your partner's happy. But also you need to remember yourself, as we're talking about, and nutrition is a big deal. And the things that, that's a big thing that I think people forget about. And they're eating their Pop-Tarts.
Yes.
Oh my God. What's your favorite flavor Pop-Tart?
Cinnamon, brown sugar cinnamon.
That's actually a good one.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it toasted. Strawberry went really hard. And then there used to be this wild berry one.
You can still find it. You know who has the best Pop-Tart selection? You ready? Walmart.
Of course.
Walmart has all of the flavors that maybe you haven't seen in all your years, like from childhood. They're back. Walmart is where to go for the Pop-Tarts.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go
back to
real nutrition. We can't talk about Pop-Tarts.
Do you like strudels?
Toaster
strudels?
The ones I used it, yeah. And then you would get like the icing. Yeah.
Nolan just eats the icing right out of the package. And there's like never enough icing for all the toaster strudels.
No, I used to save it too. If I was like, I'm gonna save this one and not use as much. Man, I can't believe.
So, okay, we need to not have a diet full of toaster strudels and Pop-Tarts. We need to eat nutritious food, especially if you're breastfeeding. Like, we need to be hydrated, right? Because the amount of water that it takes to keep making milk is quite a bit. I always tell my ladies, you want to drink half your body weight in ounces, right? That's just a good rule. So if you're weighing 100 pounds, 50 ounces of water a day, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it actually is a lot. So drinking plenty of water. And then the nutrition that is involved. So if you are breastfeeding, vitamin D is important. Calcium is important because all of that milk is going to leach all of those from you. So I think it's important that you get a lot of that in. Omega-3s are important, especially for your brain health and for anti-inflammatory effect. So diets that contain a whole lot of nutrients are important. So making sure you're getting the protein in, making sure you're eating a good, healthy, balanced breakfast and your lunch, and then snacking throughout the day, right? So there are some really good perinatal or prenatal and postnatal nutritionists that you can follow on Instagram. There's quite a few out there actually. So if you just want to go to a social handle and look up prenatal nutrition or postnatal nutrition, there's some really good dietitians on there that talk about what's really good to eat during this prenatal and postpartum period. So I do recommend following them.
Okay, so how do we get back to normalcy? How do we navigate that?
Well, first of all, there's too much social pressure, right? Talking back about the ballerina. We're not ballerinas. We're not. And you need to understand that your body just went through this miraculous thing, right? Like you literally created a human and then either had the human cut out through surgical procedure or push that human through your vagina.
Like a slip and slide.
Holy smokes. With no lube.
I know. It's a wild, beautiful
thing. Think about what we do as the female body is tremendously amazing, right? So first of all, you got to give yourself some grace, right? You just literally made a human being. So can we not worry about the bounce back and worry about just making sure that we're physically healthy, emotionally healthy, and mentally strong, right? I think those are more important. And then the bounce back as far as your body will come, right? Because if you're mentally strong, you're going to want to get out there and exercise, and you're going to want to eat right, and you're going to want to talk to your friends and get the emotional support. So let's focus on that part, because the other stuff will just fall into place, you know?
Yeah.
As far as kind of going back to your normal routine, this is honestly just going to depend on, I hate to say it, but that baby, right? There's some women that don't do a nap schedule. I know personally we didn't do one, and that worked for our family. But there are some people that absolutely follow a nap schedule. And if that works best for your family, then that's what you need to do to keep your sanity, right? If that means that getting home and you can only be out for 2 hours because you got to get back home because that baby's got to be asleep in their bed, then that's fine if that works for you. But if it doesn't work for you, and maybe you've got other children and you're trying to balance it all, if it's a car nap, it's a car nap, right? So don't try to put so much pressure on the social norms of nap time and whatever that other person is doing. You need to do what makes it work for you and your family.
Right. And then for those ladies that have to go back to work, it's yes, right. I don't know that you're ever prepared for that, right?
You're never prepared for that. Because whatever you do, if you're dropping your baby off at a daycare, if you are taking your baby to a nanny, or the nanny's coming to you, or maybe some people are just truly blessed and they have family members to take care of their baby, then either way, it's hard because you're relinquishing that care, right? You've been taking care of that baby anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. And now it's time for you to go back to work, back to where you have your other identity. And now you're going to have to figure out that balance, and not talk about that balance of the work life, mom life is no joke. And so I think this is also something that needs to be more talked about. That moment, first day I dropped Austin off, that was awful. I cried the whole way to work, just because it wasn't that I was worried about if they're going to take good care of him. I picked a good place for him to be taken care of. But it was the idea of, I'm probably going to miss out on a lot of things. Am I going to miss out on his, first crawling, which I did. I didn't see the first time he crawled. Didn't either for Nolan either. Thankfully, my sister-in-law was taking care of Nolan during that time, and she got to video it for me. So I still have that video, but not everybody has that, right? So, going back to work and finding that other identity again, and going back to whatever that career is for you, is sometimes really daunting, really scary.
Yeah. And then in that time, and even before you go back to work, the resources that we have are truly, I don't want to say endless, but they've definitely improved
for sure.
So as always, friends and family, you need that support system.
Yeah.
But now I know there's lots of like Facebook groups, mom groups,
right? Meetups, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. With or without the baby, right? If that means coffee with the baby, great. If it means coffee without the baby, that's okay too, right? And then honestly, this was hard for me, is letting these people help you. I'm still bad at that. You know that.
Yeah, you have control issues.
Yes, I do. And so I just want to do it all myself. And when they say they want to help, they truly want to help. So let them help you. I was not great about that. And I do think that if you do allow that and realize that, hey, they are here to help me, a lot of times that can really cut that anxiety.
Right. There's also books. There's podcasts.
For sure. Absolutely.
You're listening to one.
Yeah, this is a great one. The Boob too.
Oh man. Okay. You know what? Actually, we have a question that we I think applies to all this. So let's bring back our slippery solutions with a B and J.
Ooh.
Okay.
This name.
Yes. Okay. First time questionnaire, lifetime listener.
Ooh, lifetime. A whole 6 weeks.
Well,
I love it.
Okay. So I am postpartum. Unfortunately, I just don't feel sexy.
Okay.
My body looks different.
Yep.
My vagina looks different.
Yep.
Do you have any tips for rebuilding intimacy after childbirth?
For sure. So first of all, how far out are you, right? If you're over 6 weeks, now's a safe time to actually start thinking and having sex. But it's going to start with the foreplay. Don't expect that you're just going to walk into a room and you're going to have perfect sex out of the blue with your husband or partner, and it's going to be painless and everything's going to be fine again. That's actually not how it works. So talking about sex with your partner, maybe having them pick out a piece of lingerie that they think would look really great on you. Because a lot of times when they pick it out for you, it actually makes you feel like, oh, they want to see me in this, right? So I think that's a great option. Hey guys, hey women, if you have a partner that just had a baby, send them some freaking lingerie, right? That would be extremely sexy, I think, a turn on. That would make you feel more comfortable, right? That they want to see you in that aspect. And then also just sending text messages to each other during the day, maybe talking about sex. It's going to start there, right? And then realizing that your vagina, yes, it's not what it used to be, but that doesn't mean it's broken. Okay? You're not broken. I need you to remember this, that you are not broken. You just gave birth to an amazing miracle, right? So you are not broken. This is your new body, right? But that's okay. It's beautiful as is. And honestly, your partner feels that same way. So get out of your head, right? So lubricate, lube. We talked about Uber Lube the last time. It's still my favorite. If you're really dealing with postpartum vaginal dryness, talk to your provider about estrogen that you can place in the vagina. Vaginal estrogen cream can be extremely helpful in my breastfeeding postpartum mamas. And then just basically being comfortable and talking about it.
Right. And I think also a lot of people think, oh my gosh, my partner just saw me have a baby.
Yeah.
How unattractive. But I think it's actually the opposite for a lot of people.
Yeah.
When they see you've created this amazing thing that is, I mean, both of y'all are a part of this, right? I think you at times, most times, they're more attracted to you because now you're a mom.
I know.
And now y'all have this insane connection that is deeper than anything you've ever had before. Even though if you thought I had the deepest connection with my partner, well, now you've created something that
y'all can take care of together.
Absolutely.
Right? Recently, we put out like a post on our Instagram about like this and asking for like kind of stories or maybe even questions that people have had. And we had quite a few people kind of reach out and just talk about things. And most of the stuff that we've already talked about. But one thing that I know we hadn't mentioned yet is the cramps that can happen when you're breastfeeding. Not everybody talks to you about this, but as you're breastfeeding, your uterus is getting a signal from the brain to cramp down. So you might be getting like period cramps, and sometimes they can be worse than period cramps that happen when you're breastfeeding. And that's normal, okay? And that's just basically the uterus trying to shrink down to its original size. Because think how big it gets during a pregnancy. Obviously, it gets bigger because the baby's there. And so it's got to get back down to normal size. And that breastfeeding or pumping can absolutely cause cramping to occur. So just know that that's normal. And it's also going to shrink back down to normal, even if you don't breastfeed. So just know that either way, it's going to be doing that. And the cramping is normal.
Okay. I remembered the word, by the way.
Okay. What is it?
It's like kind of inappropriate.
Oh, weird.
But it's called gunt. So it's gut. And then you put see you next Tuesday into there. Yes.
God.
Apparently this is like common vernacular in Cali. So
I'm sorry. You're a Cali girl.
So
now.
you either have a fupa or a gunt. It's all the same.
I think I'm going to go with a fupa. I think it just sounds a lot nicer. I don't like the see you next Tuesday word anyways. So you don't like that word either.
I know. Again, I did not make up this word.
Yes.
I was told about this word.
Okay.
And I thought it would be an interesting thing to bring to the podcast.
Okay. Well, you're welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You now have new words to add to your vocabulary.
Yes. All right. I think we've done it.
I think so too. I hope y'all learned something.
And happy early birthday to Jeanette.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, ladies, I hope y'all tune in next time. And basically, if you want to follow us on all socials, we'd really appreciate it. The big one that we really like is our Instagram. That's where we post most of our stuff. We do have a TikTok, but Brittany's not great at that. So she says she's working on it, but still has not done anything. So anyways, I hope y'all have a great day.
Bitch.
Bye. The information provided in this podcast is for general informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. There is no provider-patient relationship formed. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The hosts, guests, and producers of the podcast do not assume any liability for the application of the information discussed. Reliance on any information provided by this podcast is solely at your own risk.